Well, shall we begin? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the JUUstice Washington Environmental Justice Session. My name is Ansley. I assist in the administration of the organization, and my background is in natural resources. Hopefully, I won't freeze up on you all. Just some gentle reminders before we get started. Some of this information I'm telling you will be put into the chat box in case I freeze up. Your mic will be left on mute and you can use the chat box, but please do so mindfully since it can be a little bit of a distraction. Our texts for this session are Doug and Sahar. They will be keeping time and monitoring the chat box. As you listen to the panelists, please bring your questions by directing them into the chat box for Sahar, who is named in the participant box as Tech Q&A. There she is. Hi, Sahar. So by opening the chat and at the bottom of the chat box, hit the arrow to toggle from everyone to Tech Q&A, and you can type your questions in there. You can also turn on and off the closed captioning, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And you can toggle between seeing one person and seeing everyone by selecting the gallery view at the top of the screen, which looks like a bunch of little squares. Also, the summit will be recorded and made available for you all, and we will provide a transcript of the panel and the Q&A to follow, which will be sent to you via a link after the summit. If Zoom boots you out for some reason, it should automatically restart again. If that doesn't happen, please use the same Zoom link to join back in. Each speaker will have 20 minutes, and after all of the speakers in this session, there will be a question and answer session. Then you will be virtually sent to a breakout group where you can unmute yourself, and in your breakout group, there will be questions offered to be addressed to integrate some of the topics that were shared in this session. Before I introduce the panel, I'd like to invite you to settle into your space and let your facial muscles soften. Relax all the little muscles around your eyes. Take note of your breath and greet your body with breath by inhaling into the basin of your belly and expand all the way up to the top. Use the full capacity of your lungs and spill over into the exhalation. Exhale all the expired air. And settle into a natural rhythm of breathing. And with that, anchor into this moment and open up to the information shared here today. And keep checking back in with your breath and just notice what resonates or what unearths for you, and welcome that. I'm honored to introduce the panel. Here with us is Xolotl Edgar Franx. He is the Washington State Campaign and Political Director for Familias Unidas por Justicia, where his work is centered around food sovereignty and organizing farm workers. He also sits on the governance board of the Washington Climate Alliance and the Labor Network for Sustainability. Also with us is Ana Maria de la Rosa, and she is a senior grassroots organizer with the UU Service Committee, working with migrant justice and climate forced displacement. Previously, she was a member of the Peace Corps in Northern Peru as a community health organizer. Also with us is Ali Tharp. She is the program director of the UU Ministry of Earth, and the climate justice strategist for UUA. She has been leading various international UU climate justice programs for 6 years. Thank you all so much for being here. We will start with Edgar, so I will now give the space over to you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Edgar. The Xolotl is like my, what we call it, my name to hide myself in Facebook. But you can call me that too. Right now I'm in a hotel room in Yakima, Washington. I've been here with my colleague, president of our union, Ramon Torres, for the last 5 months. We're organizing workers that went out on strike in May over concerns of health and safety, because the state agencies, their employers, weren't doing anything to protect them from being exposed to the coronavirus. I think being here, I've learned a lot about the role of unions and environmental justice, even though they might not seem too connected and health. And I think one of the unique things being here was that we thought we were going to be here for maybe 2 days. Usually strikes when we go, it's like they get wrapped up pretty fast. Workers are able to negotiate, or they don't want to lose days of work or whatnot. There's a lot of ways of why people go and strikes. But from here, we were here for a couple of days, and then within those couple of days, there was like 5 other warehouses that went out on strike, and thousands of workers asking for the same thing of protecting their health and safety, demanding that their employers do something. At that time, Yakima was recognized as the capital of the coronavirus cases on the West Coast. It was when we got here, it was amazing. It was you would read the newspaper and there'd be like 500 new cases, 900 new cases, like so and so many deaths. So it was really shocking to see what was happening here compared to, listening to Jay Inslee and saying that we're lowering the curve and whatnot. But, it might have been happening in the west side of Washington, but not here in east side of Washington, where, farm workers and immigrants and so-called essential workers, this is like the hub. They weren't getting any kind of protection. So now we're here. One of the companies a group of workers from one of the companies that went on strike is organizing themselves into their own independent union. It's called Trabajadores Unidos por la Justicia. I can talk more about that later. Maybe by the end of this month, we'll be able to go to a vote and have a brand new union that was born out of a pandemic, asking for power shift here in Yakima in Washington State. That's why I'm here in this hotel room. So later on I have to go meet with the workers. And it's also good to be here with everyone. I am from the west side and from Bellingham. Miss everyone over there. I see Lisa and Mike and Deb and everyone. So hello everyone, and good to see you all. So also I was honored to be invited into this conversation regarding environmental justice. Even to me, I think the term is somewhat new, as someone that never really made the connection between my day-to-day life and what was happening around my neighborhood or my town, where we work, and what environmentalism is and what environmental justice really is. It takes a process. It took a process of me of learning a lot of things, but learning a lot about how the economy works, the role workers play in it, and also the resources that are around us, and who gets access to those resources and who doesn't, and who gets those resources taken away. So, for since 2012, I think is when I first started kind of hearing more and more about environmental justice, even though it's comes from a tradition that's, very, very old. Maybe it wasn't called environmental justice before, but it comes with a lot of history behind it. Um, One of the big, I think, heroes for me when we were talking about, when we're kind of thinking back about environmental justice, was this gentleman from Brazil. His name was Chico Mendes. And he was one of the fighters in Brazil against the cutting down of the Amazon forests. And for him, it wasn't as much as fighting corporations. It was about protecting the land and the people and the history of those places. So learning about Chico Mendes, making the connection to farm worker struggles, I guess. It's maybe like maybe I think we're familiar with the work of the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez, and how they were able to take on corporations and farms, and especially during the 70s and 80s around the issue of pesticides, which is, now we get to see the science behind the huge environmental impacts that pesticides have played in affecting the life and well-being of not only farm workers, but of nature, and how it's made communities really toxic. And we still continue that fight today. But we wouldn't have had that conversation if it wasn't for workers standing up and fighting and pushing back against the narrative of, like, we need pesticides and we need all these chemicals to grow our food, while workers were saying, well, this is the cost of using all these pesticides. It's causing our kids to not develop as fast, to be born with birth defects, deaths, people coming down with cancer. In California, you can point out to all the cancer cluster communities that exist around industrial farming areas. So this is, environmental justice for us as farm workers. It means a lot. I think we get caught up in the labor component and the talk of, like, unions and stuff like that. But in reality, unions have traditionally played a big role in addressing environmental concerns. One of the concepts or frameworks that I've learned throughout the work that we've done here, especially when I was at community to community development, was using the just transition framework and what that really meant. And for those that are not familiar with it, there was a union organizer. His name was Tony Mizaki, in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, through the 90s. He represented the workers in the chemicals and nuclear industries. And they were also having the same health problems that a lot of, similar to farm workers, with exposure to all these dirty chemicals and working in hazardous conditions. And his union realized, they're working in these conditions. They're when they go home, they live in the conditions their industry has created. And it's not only affecting the workers, but it's affecting the whole community. So they came up with, so if workers are working in these industries, then workers should be the ones taking the lead in transforming these industries, or transitioning them away from being dirty and harmful to something that's good. Because your boss isn't going to do it. They're just looking at making money. And see workers as expendable. So they started the Just Transition framework about how workers can lead the transition into a new economic system, a new way of workers and labor relating into the environment. And I think that was one of the things that really, for the last couple of years, I think that's been one of my kind of interest or how to trying to figure out how we can implement this kind of thinking and actions into a farm worker union in Washington State, and continue that tradition, because we've seen some of the conflicts that have arisen when workers have a different, and industries and unions have a different framework. We saw the fight for Standing Rock, where a lot of unions actually sided with building the pipeline instead of defending tribal sovereignty and the environment there. And we see it in Bellingham with the union, the tension that arises with unions and the natives for Cherry Point. So I think at the point that we are right now, and firsthand being here in Eastern Washington, and for the last couple of years really experiencing the harm we have done to the environment with all these wildfires, I think we want to be a different kind of union. We want to think about how do we do good instead of just protecting the profits, or being interested in protecting our contract. How do we use this time that we're here, because our contract can go away at any moment, but within those couple of years that we do have a union contract with workers, what is the impact we can have and contribute to making this just transition possible? And how do we contribute to that movement and make it still continue to flourish, and so other people can also build off of. So I know, there's a lot of, I think, fronts, I guess you can say, of how to tackle this. I think where, we see the most impactful ones, and the ones that we've seen that get the most results, is the direct action component, going to the streets, shutting down points of production, protesting, picketing, all those things I think is one of the fronts. I think one of the fronts that is very new to me, but is just as much as contentious and political, is the rewriting the rules, and having rules and regulations put in place that give opportunities to movements to have the space for movements to take over, and have thinking that is not coming from right-wing think tanks or fossil fuel think tanks. And then I think that's been something pretty new also for me. We come from direct action, we're more familiar with the direct section, but the writing rules and legislation, and that becomes another fight with powerful players, because that's the way they organize themselves, and that's how they get almost everything they want, the rich people. So for the next couple of years, we're trying to try out kind of what it means to have a direct action component and also be involved in policy making and rule making. I think we first took a stab at it this summer, and I mean since May, with the coronavirus and the workers that were exposed. What rules are needed to protect workers, and also at the same time, how do we hold the governor and all these state agencies accountable, and the employers? For the longest time, all labor rules were written by employers, and all environmental rules were always tilted to industry, so they aren't accountable. So, and I think now we're seeing, I mean, we've seen it for a long time about the direction that by letting industry and all these experts, so-called, write the rules for us, we've seen the destructive path, literally, with all the forest fires and, you know, water warming up and the Arctic melting. It's just weird that we don't even talk. It's in the mainstream news that climate isn't even mentioned, and not even in debates. But you know, seeing the news about the Arctic, that there's no more ice or it's 100 degrees in the Arctic, becomes shocking. But it just becomes like, you know, now it's just like, oh, that just happened. But it's still something that's really present for us here, I think, because we're experiencing that the brunt of climate change and the lack of environmental protections here. So for environmental justice, I think for us, I think again, it comes with a different components and different levels of and sectors of fighting. Um, and to make it possible, it has to come from the communities that are the most impacted, and us to really listen to what they're saying, and be in solidarity with them. You know, the environmental justice might look different in different communities, so there isn't just one way of having environmental justice. You know, it might look different here in Yakima to what it does in Bellingham, to what it has in Mexico, and other places. So I think one of the lessons, I think, for us to have, even though that we're not as well funded or resourced as industry and other people with so-called power, we do have the ability to organize ourselves, and to fight back. And that's been the only way that I've known that we can get all the changes that that we want, through organizing and challenging power. And for now, I think I'll leave it at that, and give you and hope and to participate in the question and answers also. So thank you for having us.
Edgar, thank you so much. I just want to echo you in saying that, yeah, I think the space needs to be given for the solutions to come from the communities most impacted. And that requires challenging power. Thank you. Next, we have Ana Maria. So it's all you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be on this panel with Ali, who I get the pleasure of calling a colleague. And thank you so much, Edgar, for everything that you just shared. This isn't a part of my presentation, but my very first job is working with the Farm Workers Association of Florida. And it's where I cut my teeth in organizing. And as I was listening to you share some of your thoughts, I just kept coming back, right, to this thought around how our liberation is intertwined. And until we do right by farm workers, until we do right by the people that feed us, we can't ever claim that we have sustainable food sources, right? It doesn't matter what we eat or what we're willing not to eat, or that we're investing in how the food gets transported, if we're not also being intentional about the human rights of the folks who bring us our food, who pick our food. And so thank you for that reminder. It also made me want to look up the root of the word sustainable. And it turns out that it comes from a French word that means to hold. And so as we are talking about environmental justice and sustainability, let's really hold that root, right? That the invitation is for us to hold each other. Like, how are we holding each other in this moment? And how are we holding the folks that feed us? And so thank you so much for that. Okay, I'll get started. So my name is Ana de la Rosa. I work with UUSC. I am a senior grassroots organizer there. And I am going to share my screen because I made a presentation. Great. I'm gonna put this down. Great. So thank you so much for having me here. So UUSC is a nonprofit organization that works on human rights in the international community, and our focus is working with grassroots partners and advocates. We have 3 strategic priority areas that our work falls under. The first one is we do migrant justice work. We focus on the right to safety in Central America, the right to safety on the migrant trail, and the right to safety when you are within the US immigration system. This work is primarily led by our grassroots partners who are on both sides of the border and are in constant communication on how those 3 different buckets are being upheld and how we can support the human rights under those 3 buckets. Some of it definitely intersects with our environmental justice work, and some of it also very clearly falls under like immigration. So I do a little bit less with the migrant justice work and work mostly with the other 2 buckets, which the next one is crisis response. And this is how I think most people tend to know UUSC. They tend to know us as the people who respond to some of the really big natural disasters that happen. So we do this work by partnering with those whose access to aid is usually the most limited. We support frontline communities as they rebuild their lives on the way to a just recovery. Our work primarily focuses right now in Burma, the Syrian refugee response. In Haiti, we supported the earthquake relief. We've done work around Hurricane Harvey, the very recent hurricane in the Bahamas. We are currently supporting some grassroots partners there. And so this tends to be the main focus of this work, right? Is that when something happens, we look for the partners that are usually overlooked by some of the really big NGOs. And we ask, how can we support through grant making and also by lifting up the stories of what's going on in these particular communities so that people pay attention to what is going on. We also do some crisis response work that intersects directly with environmental justice and the issue of displacement. And so some of the work that I've been leading is I've been working with folks in the Panhandle around Hurricane Michael, and we've done a youth storytelling project. Something around like 40% of all of the youth in Panama City became homeless and are displaced after Hurricane Michael. And so we led a youth storytelling project where the young folks were able to tell their own stories about what it looks like to go to high school having to sleep around on friends' couches, and how particular communities are ignored after storms, that some groups, some of the money from FEMA and from the government and from big NGOs all tend to trickle towards certain communities, right? We know that this falls very clearly along like racial justice issues, while other communities completely get ignored. And so part of the work that we did is we train young folks in being able to tell their own stories through photography. And then they use those stories in order to lead an advocacy campaign in order to get the state to pass more funding for particularly young people who are housing displaced after the storm. We're also working with Hurricane Maria survivors who were also really interested in telling their stories, and they wanted to do it through video. So there's a series of interviews that are happening where people really want to be able to share This is what it felt like to be displaced from the island of Puerto Rico. This is what it means for me to be able to not go back home again. And the same thing, right? And then the folks in those communities are able to take those stories and use them towards advocacy, particularly in the state of Florida. So the state of Florida had the highest percentage of people who were displaced by Hurricane Maria move there. And the state wasn't prepared for such an influx, right? And so there's lots of advocacy asks on how do you take care of displaced people in your state? And the folks who survived Hurricane Maria are teaching the people in Florida how to do that. Another way that we have found that crisis response is showing up is around COVID, right? So we had lots of partners who reached out to us and said, hey, I know that we are working on this one particular environmental justice issue, and like this isn't going away, but now we have the added layer of COVID, right? Like now we have to have a COVID response. And so some of the work that we have been doing is taking the models that different organizations have been using to prepare communities around emergency disaster and saying, how do you apply this to COVID? How can we use some of the same exact tools and techniques and the community resources that you all have been developing that you would use for a tornado or an earthquake or a hurricane? And how can we apply this to COVID-19? So there's some really, really wonderful work being done at the community level, at the mutual aid level, where people are figuring out how to transfer the tools that we've been supporting them through for other natural disasters and treating COVID, right, as the disaster that it is. And so that's some of like the main crisis response work right now that I am working on and really, really supporting. As we know, things are always evolving and always changing, but that the focus is primarily on how do people want to tell their own stories and what do people want to advocate for? And then how do we use our resources as an international global rights organization to fund and elevate these advocacy asks? The other issue that we work on is climate forced displacement. Climate change poses a grave danger to the world's most oppressed and ignored populations. We know that there's increasing temperatures and variable precipitation. We know that there are melting glaciers, rising sea levels, intensifying droughts that are causing widespread flooding. These impacts are increasing food and water insecurity, leading to mass displacement and loss of lives, disproportionately affecting vulnerable populations by widening existing socioeconomic inequalities and threatening basic human rights and dignities. So we see one of our main partners that we work with in Alaska, they have been monitoring the erosion, right? The glaciers as they melt, the indigenous folks that we are working with in Alaska continue to lose their land mass. One of the big issues that has come up within the last couple of years is that the waters are so warm that they're completely interrupting the whale patterns. And most of the indigenous communities who are also losing their land loss now are also losing their main source of food and heat, right? And so for as long as folks from that area can remember, the practice is that you capture one whale and you use the blubber from the whale and all of the resources from the whale to take care of your community from one winter to the other. Well, the warm waters have completely interrupted the whale migration, and now whales aren't swimming by. And so the question is, whose responsibility is it, right, when these communities can no longer take care of themselves? Because people who live in completely other parts of the world are contributing to climate change, and they are not. And so these are some of the like international human rights questions that we're asking, like who gets to take care of and who gets to be responsible for the people that are paying the highest price for the ways that we are affecting the climate. And so the folks in Alaska have been doing a lot of tracking and gathering of their stories and truly recognizing that within the next 5 to 10 years, most of the folks that we're working with won't be able to stay on the islands that they are from off of the coast of Alaska. We also work with folks domestically who are being displaced by climate. Some of the numbers include that 25.3 million people per year have been displaced from their homes. We know that the estimates range widely, but there's anything between 25 million to 1 billion people that are expected to be displaced by climate by 2050. And these numbers, as high as they are, do not even include the people that are displaced by slow onset climate events, right? And so the slow onset climate events that we're looking at are like in places like Louisiana. We know that the New Yorker last year released a report that said Louisiana loses about a football field's worth of land mass every hour and a half due to rising waters. And so this picture right here, as you can see, this is what the land looked like in 1932. We see this is what it looked like in 2011 when it was the last known aerial picture that I could find for it. But from 2011 to 2020, right, knowing that they're losing about a football field a day, you can imagine, right, what this aerial view looks like in this moment. We work particularly with some of the tribes that are indigenous to the coast of Louisiana. And one of the tribes that we work with have been all relocated. They have been forcibly removed from their homes and given the false choice, right, to either move into this like particular mobile home community or just lose the ability to live anywhere at all. And so they have been suing and fighting back. But one of the things that's particularly cruel about this exchange with the tribes in Louisiana is that they were removed from their lands because it was deemed inhabitable because the waters were rising so much every single day. And then after all the indigenous people from these coasts have been removed, the state of Louisiana came in and built on stilts all of these different homes that are now waterfront condos that they are selling for so much money, more money than they would have ever offered the tribal folks that we are working with, right? And so we also see where this is intersecting with climate gentrification, right? The forcible removal of people, indigenous peoples or communities of color from the communities that they are from in order to then take that land and build it up and then resell it for much more money under the guise of waterfront communities. We also know that this is happening in Miami and in other places in Florida. So as I mentioned, we worked with folks in Alaska and in Louisiana. We work with 7 Pacific Island countries who are also all losing their homes due to climate crisis. I shared a little bit about in Louisiana, but I'll add that there's also that added layer of oil and gas extraction and environmental racism that has led not just to the displacement, but also direct health and socioeconomic impacts, right? These are fisher people communities, right? You can't fish, you can't make a living. We know that most of the movements around climate force displacements are happening internally within specific countries. That sometimes some of these disasters, especially not so much the slow onset ones, but the like big natural disasters cause for there to be international displacement, but that most actually happen within individual countries, and that most countries do not have any human rights laws or guidance for how people are expected to treat climate refugees. None of this exists. And so we work at the international level around pushing for what does human rights requirements for climate refugees look like. And then we're also working with legislators within the US for specific guidance, knowing that there will be continuous natural disasters coming and that we will continue to have displaced people within the United States, and that the answer can't be somebody else will figure it out someday, right? Like we need to figure it out now. We also work under the umbrella of climate force displacement with the right to resist. We know that across the country, the right to resist is under attack. We work with a coalition of folks that are constantly tracking these bills and paying attention to where governments are really taking advantage, especially in this moment, of the fact that people are feeling particularly under attack by COVID and trying to sneak in all of these critical infrastructure bills. So far, more than 20 states have passed bills that criminalize peaceful protest, right? And that these bills particularly target Indigenous land and water defenders and the Black Lives Matter movement. And we know that the specific of these bills different, but they have one thing in common. They make it harder for people fighting back against police violence, environmental racism, and other forms of structural injustice. One of the groups that we are supporting, and Ali, please feel free to add anything you think I might miss from this, is the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe of Texas. Texas passed one of these critical infrastructure bills last year, which makes it illegal to protest any kind of pipeline. And so, of course, the pipelines that they are trying to run are through the indigenous lands of the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe. They have sued the Trump administration under the illegalities around their border wall, through the heart of a local cemetery that holds the remains of this tribe, veterans, and folks who went through Mexico and quote unquote the border in order to escape as part of the Underground Railroad. They are also facing down attempts to against liquefied natural gas that is trying to go through the lands of their ancestors. And so this tribe is just being hit from every angle, right? Between the border wall that they don't recognize, that they have families on both sides of, and then oil and gas constantly trying to build pipelines through their sacred sites. Some of the work that we're doing is saying, what does it look like for tribes to be able to stand up and defend the sovereignty to the lands that are theirs? So one of the things that we're doing is we've been having a series of conversations. The next one that we're having is Friday, November 20th. I'm happy to share this information where the tribe themselves are sharing about what issues they are experiencing. And so please, I invite you all, come be a part of the conversation, come listen to the tribe share some of the issues and ways that the UU community can support them. We're also working around Release Your Relatives campaign. It's a campaign of love, resist. And we have been supporting movements that are asking to release Indigenous water protectors from federal prison. We were doing this before COVID-19. We know that there are folks still in jail from Standing Rock. And so we have been supporting some of those movements. And now we have been supporting the movements where we're asking for water protectors and land defenders who are in federal prison to be released due to COVID-19. And so if you all want to check out the campaign, Release Your Relatives from Love Resist, there's lots of different ways we're asking folks to show up and help us put the word out around that. And I will just quickly share some of the additional projects that we're doing at UUSC. Is we're working with Minnesota around Line 3. We are working with the Movement for Black Lives. With Side with Love, we've been leading a series of conversations around the Breathe Act. We are working on a Gulf Coast Recovery Fund. The Gulf Coast has now seen its 6th hurricane this season. That's at least a Category 3. And so we understand that this is a part of the country that's going to get continuously hit by natural disasters. And what does it look like to build longer term supports and then support the ongoing work that is really powerful and being led by people on the ground. And then we're also just supporting different communities that are building up their disaster justice work around prevention and preparation for whatever may come. And last but not least, if you have any questions about the projects that I've shared or how you all can be involved, please feel free to email me. Xolotl leads specifically our work around climate force displacement, and Josh leads our work around the right to resist. And that's it. Oh, I can't hear you. Is it just me?
Ansley, you were on mute. Did you want to say anything?
It says that I am not muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just saying that you can take the space now. And thank you, Anna Maria.
Thank you, Anna. Awesome. It's so good to be with you all. I'm Allie Tharp with the UU Ministry for Earth and the UUA Organizing Strategy Team for Climate Justice Ministries. And my cats are fighting. I don't know if you can hear them. I also have a presentation to share with you all. And the theme of this summit, Committing Ourselves to the Great Turning, is aligned with Joanna Macy's work around the work that reconnects. And so I wanted to start us off with grounding in gratitude, which is one of the things that they do often in the work that reconnects. So I want to invite everyone to think of a mentor or ancestor you are deeply grateful for. Say their name or names out loud, and also thank you for, and a few words lifting up how they have taught, inspired, and supported you. So let's just take a few moments to do that together. I'll put myself on mute, and we'll just do it in our own space. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I hope through this presentation you will have a deeper understanding of the principles, priorities, and landscape of UU Climate and Environmental Justice Ministries and feel inspired and ready to join the Create Climate Justice Network and its community of practitioners. So just a little bit about me to begin. I'm a UU young adult. I'm 30 years old. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I have a background in arts activism, nonviolent direct action campaigns, and food and land justice projects. I began organizing for UU climate justice work in 2014, and then am one of your denominational climate justice leaders with the UUA and Ministry for Earth. And this picture is from 2015, about when these things began. You might recognize some of the folks with me there. We have a UU Young Adults Climate Justice Network. Okay, so I wanted to share UU Ministry for Earth's mission is to be a wellspring of spiritual and educational grounding and practical support for bold, accountable action for environmental justice, climate justice, and the flourishing of all life. So we serve the UU community to live out our values in these ways. And we're particularly trying to provide UUs with inspiration, education, connection, and activation. So some of the core values guiding that work are faith and spirituality, particularly the UU faith and spirituality, environmental justice, and partnership and collective action. And then here's a bit of a timeline for you about how this work has evolved over time. So 1989 to 91 was when the seventh principal project of the UUA, which became UU Ministry for Earth in 2015, was first conceived and established by a bunch of lay volunteers and seminarians and ministers. And they developed the Green Sanctuary Program and a handbook. The handbook came first, it evolved into a program. And then really in the last 15 years, we've seen a lot of action and growth within UU environmental and climate organizing. 2006 was the first major statement about climate change from the UUA General Assembly. 2008, the Ministry for Earth passed the Green Sanctuary Program over to the UUA to manage. 2012, we formed a Young Adults Climate Activist Network. 2013, the UU at the United Nations formed a program to support climate action teams at congregations. And 2014 was when environmental justice really became more centered in the conversation. within UU. And part of that was a really significant gathering in Detroit, Michigan. And some of the things that emerged from that are the book Justice on Earth with Skinner House Press, and also the launch of the Commit to Respond campaign, which was the first denominational climate justice initiative, launched in 2014 and concluded in 2017. And then 2018 is when we've launched the current iteration of faith-wide unity and action on climate justice with the createclimatejustice.net, which I'll talk about a bit more through my talk. And yeah, so that's been going for 2 years strong. We also just revised the Green Sanctuary program to focus more on climate urgency, and climate resilience, mitigation, and justice are kind of the new 3 pillars of that program. And then I'll speak a bit more about Harvest the Power, which is very current to this month and next month and the time we're in right now. So that's a bit of history for you. And so a bit more about Create Climate Justice. This is an initiative mobilizing the UU faith community to be a force collectively for creating climate justice. And so grounding principles for Create Climate Justice are, of course, the UU principles and sources, as well as these 3 movement principles to guide how we organize and work together. The Jemez principles for democratic organizing, the principles of environmental justice established in 1991, and the principles of working together established in 2002. So if these aren't that familiar to you, or if you haven't read them in over a year, I'd highly encourage you to look these up, and I can share some links later in the discussion. But so Wendy, who one of the people is here right now, Wendy Condrat, actually was with me where we went through these principles and then discerned how they connect to UU principles, right? So I really encourage you to do some deeper reflection and learning about how our UU values are interconnected with the vision set forth by these affected communities for what environmental justice really looks like and how we get there together. Okay, so I'm trying to pack a lot into my 20 minutes, so I hope I'm not talking too fast, and feel free to let me know if I am. But I wanted to give you the how, the theory of change, how are we organizing with Create Climate Justice, and also the what are we doing right now? So we're starting first with the how we are doing these things. Our theory of change is that we will focus first on high-level faith engagement, modeling bold prophetic action in eye-to-eye partnership and solidarity with frontline communities. An example of this is the partnership with the Carrizo Comecrudo tribe that Ana Maria just shared. Secondly, empowering emergent strategy and grassroots leadership through fostering relationship and collaboration between place-based, identity-based, role-based, and issue or campaign-based networks and initiatives. So emergent strategies, for those who haven't heard the term before, are ways for humans to practice complexity and grow the future through relatively simple interactions. This is a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown from the book Emergent Strategy, which I definitely would encourage you to read. So it kind of breaks down into how do we create new ways of being in the future we want through the relatively simple way that we interact and are related to one another. So I wanted to share, these are organizations that are partnering in different ways that I've partnered with for Create Climate Justice, including JUUstice Washington through our Coalition of State Action Networks. That's, an obvious example of a place-based network or initiative. Same with this is the Canadian Unitarian Council. And then an example of an issue-based would be UU's for Just Economic Community, who have been showing up really strongly for the work for a Green New Deal. And then DRUM is an example of an identity-based network or initiative supporting UUs of color. And then I would point to the UU Ministers Association or LAREDA as role-based networks and organizations that we seek to partner with and build collaboration with. And the green sanctuary congregations, right? That would be another, both a place-based thing and a particular role. Like these are green leaders within congregations. Okay. So the third theory of change here is that we are seeking to provide resources for training, spiritual grounding, and practical support to UU constituents who are doing the work for climate justice. So that's how we're organizing what we're seeking to do, or how we're seeking to do it. And then our priority areas were established fall of 2018. And I'll get into more that will begin a process very soon for reevaluating the priorities of the Create Climate Justice Initiative after the 2020 election. But right now, and for the past 2 years, we've been focused on strengthening UU communications and mutual support networks. And this has been incredibly important. One of our weaknesses is that even people relatively close to each other aren't really in communication and supporting one another to do very similar work. So trying to strengthen our own web, right, so that we can better show up for the broader whole of this movement. Secondly, to move in solidarity with Indigenous frontline communities. And thirdly, to catalyze a just transition towards an ecological civilization through partnership and civic engagement. So we had Edgar talked a bit about a just transition and what that means. This is a screenshot from the Reinvest in Our Power campaign, which is a project that the UUA is actually involved in with our endowment to divest from fossil fuels and reinvest into communities doing the work to build regenerative communities. So in short, this framework, there are many different ways that it did emerge from the labor union and has evolved in different sectors over time in terms of what we mean. But when I'm talking about a just transition, I'm really saying, okay, how do we move from an extractive economy that uses force and digging and dumping and uses people as labor in an exploitative way, and divest from that, filter it through the values of what we really want our societies and communities to be grounded in, and invest in a regenerative economy where social and ecological well-being are the core purpose of our economy, of the way our societies are shaped and whatnot. So I'll share a link for more grounding in this framework from the movement generation. And but I wanted to give this as just a very visual, quick way to think about what we mean. So a lot of the conversation around a Green New Deal is directly related to this notion of, okay, we need a holistic shift. How do we get there? So now we'll move into how you can get involved and what's really on the horizon. So this is a screenshot from the website createclimatejustice.net, where you can sign up by clicking in the top or in the bottom left. And I wanted to show you, I want to invite you to find me on createclimatejustice.net. Just go to the search bar on the left or go to the member directory and look me up. And you can even send me a message. So here's a screenshot. When you click my name, you go to my profile, right? And then you're able to email me through this website. And so if you ever want to reach out, you can just sign up here. Oh, sorry about that. And so everyone who joins Create Climate Justice has a profile page like this. You're able to find one another. And then there's also group pages. So these featured groups are some of the most active, particularly UU Climate Action Network, UU Ministry for Earth, Environmental Justice Practitioners Network, and the Green Sanctuary Program are the 4 largest groups. So if you really want to connect with other people, you should consider joining those groups. And then you can search the groups, but there's a blue button in the upper right to help you search in the groups, and also quick links on this page to the groups you're a part of. So I want to share, JUUstice Washington has a group. Bill McPherson, who's here today, who's one of UU Ministry for Earth's board members, is a leader within JUUstice Washington around climate. And so Bill and also Deb Cruz are the moderators, and Diane Brooks, who is our support person for this web platform, are the 3 moderators of this JUUstice Washington group on createclimatejustice.net. So if you're really passionate about this area, you can request to join this group. There's a conversations page, a page where you can email everyone involved. You can share about upcoming events, resources, reports, and even have subgroups. If you have, Justice Washington climate and environmental justice priorities, you could make subgroups and task forces and things of that nature. So this is a place designed for you to come together and organize. And then I also wanted to share with you that in the member directory, I just did this quickly this morning. You can go to, you select the United States and then the state of Washington. Currently there are 32 members. So some of you are in there already, but many of you are not. And so if you join, you can up the number of how much Washington as a whole is participating. And then you can reach out to every UU person who cares about this issue, who's engaging in the state of Washington by clicking this message filtered users button. And you can even filter it by interest tag, right? So you can say who's in my state, who cares about Indigenous rights issues, right? Filter the list, directly contact them. And I know you have other great platforms for that, but there are other issue areas, energy, renewable energy, where you can directly reach out and find people proximate to you around certain issues. So it's a very powerful tool to try to expand, right, the ability for people to connect and work together. The other things on the horizon right now, we have Harvest the Power of Community for Justice and Decolonization. This is a current campaign that I'm working on with the UUA and also with UUSC. We're building some opportunities for collective action over the next 2 months. So UU The Vote is having a week of action, October 21st through the 27th. And of course, then we just have a few more days before the election. So that final push there, I would also say, is just an extended second week of action that I want to invite everyone to participate in. And then after the election, there will be some virtual spaces for community care and for formation, responding to what happens and supporting people through electoral defense and just the other work we can anticipate will be required in that really chaotic time. And then before we know it, the holidays are going to come. And so we have, over the past 5 years, passed some resolutions through the General Assembly, one about Thanksgiving and reconsidering that holiday and how UU should be observing it. And then also some work around recognizing the 400th year since the Plymouth landing, the Pilgrims came to the United States, and how that ties in with UU history. So now is like this time that as a faith, we're committing to deepening our understanding of colonial history, what our faith's role was within that era, and how we'll show up with Indigenous peoples today. So there is a summit that I am organizing with some colleagues, Harvest the Power Convergence for Justice and Decolonization, November 19th to the 22nd. And this will create teach-in spaces and also some rituals and relationship building to lead us into that week of Thanksgiving holidays. And then on the day of Thanksgiving, there is the 50th anniversary that the United American Indians of New England have hosted a day of mourning at Plymouth, and they will have a live stream, and we, the UUA, the Side with Love campaign, will be sharing that, broadcasting that live stream, and there will also be a message from Susan Frederick Gray. And so there's a direct request not to celebrate the first Thanksgiving story of the Pilgrims and the Indians, the Wampanoag tribe, and if you are going to talk about that in your congregations, talk about it in a way that's like peeling back the way this has evolved into a colonial myth, a colonial piece of propaganda. And so let's ground in, different ways, like Canada's Thanksgiving Day is actually Indigenous Peoples Day next Monday, and they don't have nearly as much colonial messaging around that is. So we can definitely reframe what it means to give thanks, and also what it means to live in relationship, as Anna Maria was saying, to the land and to the food that you're eating and all of these things. So there's a lot to do together over the next 6 weeks. And then after this time, after Harvest the Power for Justice and Decolonization, I'm organizing for winter visioning and strategy sessions for Create Climate Justice. These will be closed sessions with a diverse group of UUs and partners. There will be like a nomination process for people to come, and there will certainly be some of you who are here, I imagine and hope, will be in the room for these conversations. And so there will be 2 short pre-programs in December leading in before holiday break. And then the visioning and strategy sessions will be in January of 2021. That's when they will begin. And I just found out the other day, and I'm really excited to announce that we are partnering with a facilitation team from the Wildfire Project to help lead this process. And then what emerges from these sessions that we'll have in January, and I think it'll be some digesting and evolution through February and March as well, to really condense it into a new set of priorities for the initiative. The plan is to announce what emerges from this more participatory collaborative process at an event on the spring equinox, March 20th, 2021. And so that is another time where, similar to the Harvest the Power Summit, we hope to have a lot of congregations and UUs coming together for the spring equinox around the themes of climate justice and environmental justice. So that is all on the horizon. The spring equinox event will also launch the Spring for Change season of sacred activism. So this is a time where you have World Water Day, Earth Day, and Biodiversity Day, and Ministry for Earth has selected the theme of the path to healing and regeneration to focus in on. And so that will involve, how do we heal and regenerate our spirits, our communities, and the earth. So please do join that. And then here's some specific invitations. So there are mailing lists for Ministry for Earth and also for the Create Climate Justice Initiative. Also, please join the platform if you're really invested in this, and participate in these programs I just mentioned. Plan your own local programming in alignment with the themes and programs that I just went into. And if you have capacity to give, I do want to ask you to please give your financial support for this work. We definitely need it. And so this can be personal giving, this can be congregational giving, where you recommend UU Ministry for Earth for a special collection, or if you have a granting endowment fund with the church or another institution, or a special gift that might go towards this kind of ministry, please do think of us and lend us your support. So I look forward to the discussion, the Q&A. I do again want to say you can reach out to me through createclimatejustice.net or directly through my email address, which I'll also put in the chat box. And then also Diane Brooks, who's here from Evergreen, can be reached to support onboarding for you or for your congregational teams at info@createclimatejustice.net. Or there's a contact button on the site for any issues that you're having or questions, or if you want more support. So that is me. I'm not sure where we are on time.
You're about 3 minutes over, but we're good.
Okay, thanks. Check.
Now we will shift into Q&A. So Sahar, would you like to take over?
Sure.
Do we want to take a break or continue?
We didn't take a break last time, so I was just going based off the previous session, but we do have a break scheduled, but we went over a little bit. So
I'll just launch right in then. So Edgar, are any UU churches working on the Hanford problems? This is one question that arose in the chat.
Not that I know of, for my time being here in Yakima. Actually, I was just giving the contact information for the UU folks here in Yakima that I'll be reaching out to see what kind of things we can work on in solidarity. But about Hanford, I don't know.
And you mentioned Union, New Union, and somebody just asked that you maybe put that information in the chat. Another question is there a way for justice groups or congregations to support the transformation of unions to take a longer term perspective on the interests of their members?
I think the best way within unions and the labor movement to kind of help shift is just doing a lot of solidarity work, especially right now when contracts are about to expire. You know, you saw the teachers going out on strike and many other industries going out on strike right now because of a lot of their benefits that are getting rolled back because of austerity measures or a lot of the cutbacks that are happening. If we can be in solidarity with them and show up in their time of need, that's a great way to start opening up the conversations about other things. I think it's very, I don't know, almost I don't know if it's like disrespectful or something to not to kind of assume that unions don't know about climate change. And I think there's a lot of, I think people know, but the way to really start shifting the way unions operate is by making that connection with community. I think that's one of the areas where we lost touch a lot of the times in unions, that we became so insular and became just about protecting contracts and forgot about doing the community work and the outreach, and having that connection. And that I think is the most valuable thing that we can do, is have that connection not only to the labor movement but to the movements that are already happening around the community. So like those relationships don't get exploited by, you know, corporations or whatever. I think that's an important thing that we can start practicing more solidarity, and also um, having that, giving those opportunities to really do community work for unions, for our part, to do the community engagement part also as well.
Okay, thank you. And Anna Maria, do you have a template or list of best practices for sheltering folks displaced by natural disasters? Was one question asked.
I don't have a template for displaced folks, but we do have a template for congregations that are doing this work around in the umbrella of migrant justice, right? And so we know that different congregations have stepped up as sanctuary spaces. And I think a lot of those skills would definitely, they could cross over, right? That we could use a lot of the lessons that we're learning through the sanctuary model for climate refugees. And so I am more than open to anybody who wants to get together and look at what's available in the climate justice space and what's available in the migrant justice space, and co-create this guide. So please email me. Let's make it happen.
Anna Maria, you were also, it was also mentioned that a human rights text, which you recommended for climate displacement rights, that the citation be put in the chat if possible. Okay, so another question I have to the entire panel is, well, if you could speak to one transformative thing happening in your network that are moving us all as a collective in the direction of environmental justice, what would that be? I'm sure many of those pieces were mentioned in the speech, but if you could just speak a little bit more to that.
Will you repeat the question one more time, please?
Sure. So if you could speak to one like transformative strategy or program that is happening in your network that are moving us all, like as a collective, in the direction of environmental justice, what would that be?
Well, I want to say working with Anna Maria around the partnership with the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe is one of the things about my work that makes me feel the happiest. I'm like, wow, I can't believe we were able, from going from this tribe is incredibly small. It's a very small tribe that's not recognized by the state of Texas or the federal government. And so the resources and recognition that they are not receiving because the genocide of their people was so extreme is really significant. And so I just feel really grateful, again, in terms of we're doing similar work but not working together. Here's this instance where a state action network has successfully partnered for environmental justice, which was picked. They vote by congregation on their issues they focus on, and environmental justice was picked for the first time in this past cycle. So I hope that work really continues in connection with the Texas UU Justice Ministry, but it's just been really powerful to partner with both UUSC and Texas UJM and the tribe, and to support them as they held an online tribunal, as they're working on these lawsuits, as they're doing a lot of real COVID response work. So it's what we're doing is providing resources for them to do the things that they're already going full speed to do everything they can around. So, I think it's one of the things brought up earlier is we are very comfortable generally. A lot of UUs have very comfortable circumstances, and a lot of people in our broader communities do not. And so the more we can do to really leverage and really be in relationship, I think the more we're moving in that direction.
All right, would any of the other panelists like to speak to that question, or should I move on?
I guess something that we're getting engaged now is in there's a lot of, again, getting into the world of legislature. One of the big things that we helped kind of coordinate was the HEAL Act, passing the HEAL Act in Washington State, which put an environmental justice lens on projects that are going to be developing in Washington State. That, I think it was pretty big. This upcoming year, this legislative session, we're trying to do more around the issues of transportation, and having those kind of talks. I know, especially, I think one of the more kind of contentious points is and around the environmental and climate justice is the issue of carbon pricing and carbon tax. So that's something that we're trying to, I know our position, but how to work with organizations that have a different point of view as us on carbon markets and carbon taxes and cap and trade and all that stuff. I think it's a difficult conversation that needs to be had around the work in environmental justice, because it's happening really fast and it has the potential to do a lot of good or a lot of bad, depending on how you structure everything, all these markets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to add, I absolutely second what Ali shared about us being able to support the Carrizo Come Crudo tribe. And then the other piece that feels really important is that we are supporting the first ever legislation of its kind that's been co-sponsored by Senator Markey from Massachusetts, that would provide protections for internally climate force displaced people. So currently no legislation exists that holds any kind of state or federal government officials accountable for people having to relocate because of environmental injustices. And so that feels like a really important piece where you folks can join us in advocating for passing that legislation.
We had a question of what is CFD work? What does it stand for?
Climate force displacement.
And what are current prospects of hiring more environmental workers through a Green New Deal?
Get out the vote. Like, we got to change policyholders at all levels, you know. That's a big thing. There's a climate policy project that has like 200 pieces of legislation stacked up that they want to move if they can. But right now we're in this, you know, political gridlock. So that's a huge piece of it. There's also a lot of work like Seattle passed, you know, there's like the local level where we can pass Green New Deal initiatives. So shout out to the folks who've been working on that locally. And then, so the Gulf South has a Center for Law and Policy that is bringing together a coalition. So there's a major coalition forming across the Gulf South for a Green New Deal, and then creating policy tables in each state and trying to move at that level. So I'm plugging in a little bit with them and excited to see where that can lead us. But it's something that, you know, the Bruce Lee quote, to move like water. We need to move like water to get the Green New Deal, and just see where we can plug in and shift the dynamics of policy in every way that we possibly can, and recognizing that we do have some major, you know, logs in the middle of the river, so to speak, that we're going to have to move through and push. Check.
Yeah, I think the prospect, I think a lot of the studies that have come out about the Green New Deal and all the potential for new jobs to be developed, I think it's, I mean, it's out there. I think the biggest thing I think that's lacking is like a lot of political will. Especially, you know, it was disappointing to see the debates, the presidential and the vice presidential, where when asked about the Green New Deal, even Kamala Harris and Joe Biden ran away from it and wouldn't touch it. And, you know, I don't know, that's not very inspiring. I don't know if that's what they really believe, but I think if you're trying to fight for bold new ideas, then you should be out there defending them. Especially one as popular as the Green New Deal, which mobilized, you know, it has the potential to mobilize people from all sectors, and has broad appeal to almost every community. So, you know, I think that's something that I think to organize around. I think it's a great organizing tool or organizing platform, one that really speaks to the working class and you know, poor people, but we just need people fighting for it, not running away from it.
This is a two-part question. Speaking to emergent strategies and the importance of creativity, what are one or two essential strategies that you feel makes your work most effective, and how do you stay nourished in this work?
So one thing to say is the importance of relationships and relational organizing, that, you know, one of the things that nourishes me is to see the inspiring work of people who I feel in relationship to, right? And so like Cherie Foytlin is a climate justice organizer who I met in 2012, and then 2018 she launched the resistance of a major pipeline battle in Louisiana. And Cherie is like one of the boldest, most prophetic women I've ever met. And so to commit to be in relationship, and that, okay, I will show up for Cherie, and then to see both what she goes through, right? Like people were trying to get her kids taken away from her, filing Child Protective Services complaints to mess up her life, literally physically attacking her in her front yard. And I know there's so many stories like this. The people really on the front of these issues are the people really taking the biggest risks. To be in relationship to them, and that the way that affects you is incredibly important. If you're doing your work only at an intellectual and policy level and you're not actually in relationship, then you really don't move the same way, because you don't have that same level of commitment and drive to do it. So that's really one thing I'll lift up.
Yeah, absolutely. Relationships are key. And I would say for us as an international human rights organization is like knowing our place and knowing our privilege. So being able to very clearly know like what's ours to own and then what is ours to offer up, right? And continuously coming back in and checking in with ourselves that we know that our role as a grant maker organization, right, is to truly let the folks that are closest to the issues lead. And so for me, it feels like there's just, as long as we're coming back and continuously checking in and asking the question, what is our place and what is our privilege? It feels like that's what helps me be centered in this work.
One of the things that brings me peace, or I don't know, is going out and farming or gardening. I think that's been something that I've been enjoying. And another thing is just being with regular people, not having to have like a lot of intellectual discussion and stuff. And that's what I liked about being here. Every day we're out and, in the neighborhoods or in people's homes, we get invited to go get dinner and just hanging out and being, breaking away from all the political stuff and just communicating and talking to people about, regular everyday stuff. I think that's something that I found really refreshing being here in Yakima, going out into the fields or in the warehouses and just speaking to people as humans and finding out what they need to be okay, and going to hang out. Even in this pandemic, when we're told to isolate and all that, we still find time to kind of congregate together and in a safe way and just learn from one another and hang out.
Last piece I want to lift up around emergent strategy is, it looks at biomimicry, looks at what are ways that nature organizes and how can we apply that to how we organize as people. And fractals are like a tremendous like structural element in nature, right? So when we look at, okay, how do you nourish on your own level? How do you nourish your community? How do you nourish, this broader movement and the world? And so I think a lot in fractals in terms of how can UUs come together and organize better? How can we be strong as individual UUs, as congregations, as a state action network, as a faith-wide movement? And so I, am really trying to do everything I can to help us be in alignment across all these different scales, right? That's another way.
And I think we have time for one more question before we close the Q&A session. So collaboration and how you do that effectively with often folks who have seemingly opposing views. So building bridges, right? Back to strategies. And also it's a two-part. So where do you see resistance in your network and how do you mitigate that?
I'll name that one of the ways that I see resistance show up is around lack of imagination. right? I think we have all been conditioned to believe that some things can only happen in very specific ways, right? And what this moment is calling us into is expansive imagination. And so I think if we can find ways to shift out of the scarcity models that we've all been conditioned into, and truly believe that there are radical and fundamentally different ways of showing up for each other, a lot of these barriers would be taken down. And so I would say, let's be more imaginative together. Let's truly believe that there are different ways of doing this work.
I think one of the biggest points of resistance, I think, within, I don't know as much as our organization, but in some of the other networks, is to have this conversation around capitalism. People are really scared to have this, that conversation, I think, because I think with everything that we've done, or kind of the whole economy and society has been structured to preserve and to grow capitalism, but it's the main driver of poverty and exploitation, not only in the US but around the world. And for capitalism to flourish, it depends on a lot of things, and depends on racism and exploitation of labor, exploitation of resources. So to have a clear analysis and it requires those conversations, especially if we're talking about changing the world, and we have to change everything, including the economic system that has put us in this place. So we always say that you can't save the world. What was it, not Octavia Butler, but was it Audre Lorde, that you can't change the, what is it, using the master's tool, the quote, something like that. I forget. There you go. Master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Thank you. So that's something I firmly believe. So and agree with what Ana Maria said, that includes envisioning new ways and new ways of thinking, and trying out and experimenting new things.
Yeah, there's two things I'll name in terms of tension. One is the difference in what the role of faith is within broader movement and faith communities showing up for justice issues. I would say that, is it the role of faith movements and communities showing up for justice to be bold and prophetic, to really advocate for the truest form of living out our values in the world? Or there's another kind of theory of how faith movements should show up, is that we are the people who voice the moderate approach in order to bring people together, to have to create the dialogue between partisanship, right? Like, we're in this hyper partisan, hyper polarized moment. And so a lot of interfaith organizations and faith-based organizations strive to be that place where Republicans and Democrats come together and try to learn how to speak, and so be that bridge, right? And put so much energy into being that bridge. And there's a tension there, right? It's like, can I say the truest form of what I believe my values to be, or am I toning down the way UU values look in order to be the bridge between hyper-polarized political perspectives? Or, we see this play out a lot. And so I just want to name that is a tension and a difficulty within faith-based organizing. That it's also one of the things, it's like, you need to know what each other's roles are and lanes are, right? There's a place for both in the work, but there's also tension that gets created by working at that level. And the other thing here is UU environmental and climate folks really did a lot of damage by the message that, why would you focus on, any of the other justice issues that other people work on will get worse if climate change gets worse, and therefore you should stop what you're organizing on in order to organize with me around climate, right? And so this turns people off so tremendously. And it's also, you know, just goes into, to me, it's like, yeah, kind of this trickle down approach to justice, to think that, well, if we just, you know, address climate, then all the, you know, then racial issues will not be as bad as they would, et cetera. So we don't have to focus on those. We just need to fix climate. This is super harmful and it's not helpful. It doesn't build strong coalitions. It doesn't meet people where they're at. And it comes from a deep place of privilege to really say, hey, this issue that you're working on that you care about that affects you personally is not important if you don't work on what I work on. And so we need to figure out how to actually do better than that.
So thank you so much, Ali. And actually, that's a point that I'm reiterating often in my own work. But now is our time to transition to the breakout rooms. And in the chat is a little bit of the prompt. I'll read it really quickly and then send you guys in. So we're here today because this matters. You've just heard from the panel, and some panel members will be in your breakout rooms. There is energy around this issue. So base your discussion on the presentation, the Q&As, summarize the aspect of the issues that are most important to your group. Is there a consensus about the way forward? And what does your group suggest we work toward for the December action-oriented part 2 of the summit, of the 2020 Justice Summit? And the facilitator hopefully will assign a scribe or find someone else to keep record, guide introductions about 10 seconds, and assist with the flow of conversation around the group's collective interests, as well as bringing it to a close at the appointed time. You have about 20 minutes, and I'm just going to send you in now. Welcome back. I'm going to invite you now to add whatever really rich material you came up with into the chat. Just feel free to input anything that you think would be great to bring back to the collective, and we'll just take a moment to read off some of that. So there was an interest in displacement, homelessness, and realizing the adverse impact of COVID, involvement in humanity rising that has 10-year calendar. Seeing legislative work on the state level will be important. Engaged in newly formed multi-faith organizations to educate and inform themselves with the potential for action. Support of frontline communities and transition our economic system that is equitable and restores and protects our environment. Dugnut economics, intersectionality of climate change and population growth is a major concern as well. 3 bills that will be introduced into Washington State Legislature in 2021 is Growth Management Act, must include climate accountability. Clean Fuels Act will be reintroduced. Building Electrification Bill will be reintroduced. Justice Washington will be working on these bills in the winter and spring. Presentations on Native peoples in North and South America show us the needs to work closely with tribes on environmental justice. Silver bullet, US military is responsible for high emissions. Humanity is at a point where we can face that issue. So if you didn't hear me before, please enter any input that you might have from your breakout room experience into the chat. We'll just take a moment to read it before we transition. Support union and Indigenous work. The Faith Action Network. Prioritize key elements. Engage in imaginative envisioning of a future we all want. Many churches are working on particular projects such as LNG plants, ports, dams, carbon taxes, lots of work with different groups, Sierra Club, Indigenous groups, 350. Our group discussed the fact that some congregations have a social justice council with multiple subcommittees, racial justice, peace and justice, advocates for women, and many others. Seems like a fragmented approach without much collaboration between committees and other congregations need to have more justice-centered work and more effort to work together. Build relationships and connect with UUFME, UUSC, and groups outside your congregation. Need to save any old growth forests left as well as second growth forests that are 100 or more years old. Cut trees that are 40 years old, not ones around 100 years old. What does it mean for liberal UUs in the environmental work to be at odds with the radical approach led by the UUA? Can you be part of the solution without believing in the great turning? Should we focus on policy? If our systems are unsustainable, does that invalidate the liberal or incremental approach to progress? Some UUs don't want to work on a climate action team unless it centers marginalized frontline communities. Cross-issue groups, earth care, not warfare, affordable housing that prevents sprawl. All of this will be also made available through the transcript for our recording of the summit for all the registrants.
I believe that is our time. I wanted to thank you all so much for your presence. Thanks so much to our speakers. Take this information from this session, digest it, compost it, and nourish mindful responses and find ways to take action. There will be a break now for lunch from 12:49, which is now, to 1:45. And we welcome you back at 1:45 for the panel on refugee, immigrant, and migrant solidarity. Again, thank you all so much for your presence.